This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenivek, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
And good afternoon, everyone. Live on Bloomberg TV, radio, streaming on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals. I'm Katie Greifeld alongside Bailey Lipschultz, in for Carol Massar and Tim Stenivek. Neither of them are here today, Bailey, and they're missing all-time highs in the stock market on the S&P 500, somehow happening with Nvidia lower on the day.
Nvidia beat and raised, not enough, but still powering higher. Risk on, feel.
Risk on certainly feels that way across the market, even though there's plenty of cross currents out there still ahead. We'll discuss them all, starting with Fed Governor Lisa Cook suing President Trump over his attempt to fire her for alleged mortgage fraud. Cook saying that Trump's move puts the U.S. economy at risk. Bloomberg's McKee and Erik Larson join us to discuss.
Two perfect people, Katie, especially after Lisa Cook suggesting a, quote, clerical error was behind that dispute. We're also going to have that market reaction to Nvidia earnings, as you mentioned. Chip giant delivering a tepid forecast, but analysts sticking bullish. Mandeep Singh and Ian King are going to help us break that down.
We'll also take a look at what's happening at the CDC. The Trump administration firing the agency's director just weeks into her tenure. Bloomberg's Madison Muller will have all the details.
And later, Bloomberg Businessweek heads to the U.S. Open. Not us, Katie, but we will check in with Tim Stenivek and Molly Smith on everything going on over in Flushing, New York.
Yeah, they're having fun playing tennis. God bless them. First up, let's take a look at the day's trade and the top business stories. We'll head over to Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much indeed. More moving parts to this market than the action at the U.S. Open. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. Do want to provide a little more color, a little more detail about the Lisa Cook story. We'll have a whole lot more with our Michael McKee coming up. But Fed Governor Lisa Cook's lawyers are suggesting that an unintentional, quote, clerical error may have been behind the mortgage dispute over which President Trump wants her fired. Again, we'll have more on that coming up in just a moment. Checking the markets, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, they're all higher right now. We got the S&P up 16. Katie used the word record. That's where we stand right now. 64.98 on the S&P, advancing by 0.3%. Going to be very interesting to see whether we close above 6,500. Right now, the Dow up 21, gain there of under 0.1%. We've got NASDAQ up 0.5. NASDAQ 100 index up 0.6%. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares advancing by 0.1%. And our Mag 7 index up 0.5%. Nvidia right now trading lower by 0.9%. The 10-year 4.21%, with the 2-year currently yielding a 3.64%. Spot gold up $20 the ounce, up 0.6%, 34.17. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 4.10, 64.44 a barrel. Bitcoin right now a little changed on the day at 112,385 on Bitcoin. So again, recapping, S&P 500 indexes advancing now by 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, thank you for that update, Charlie Pellet. As Charlie said, record highs on the S&P 500 with no help from Nvidia. But let's turn back to one of our top stories today. This just crossing the wire, that Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook's lawyers suggesting that an unintentional clerical error may have been behind the mortgage dispute over which President Donald Trump wants her fired. Joining us now in the studio, we have a great roundtable. Bloomberg TV and radio international economics and policy correspondent Mike McKee is sitting by. So too is Bloomberg News U.S. legal reporter Erik Larson, who just helped to break that story that I mentioned. So Erik, let's start there. This is the first time, I believe, that we've seen the potential defense laid out by Lisa Cook's lawyers.
Yeah, that's right. No, she did not explicitly deny the allegations, but clearly at this stage in the case, they're signaling a potential defense here, which is that not only could this be a clerical error, but that it wasn't material to any decisions that were made on these mortgages, that no one was harmed by it. And really that regardless, it's not cause to fire her because these mortgages were done a year before she joined the board, and has nothing to do with her job. So she laid out a wide array of potential defenses in this filing.
And Erik, emergency hearing scheduled tomorrow at 10 a.m. What's going to happen? What can we expect? How critical is that in this saga? It's
really critical. This TRO hearing is going to indicate whether or not the firing can go forward at this early stage in the case. Such orders usually last around 2 weeks, so they will probably seek a longer lasting order that would block her firing during the entire case, which could take months or longer. But this will be the initial thoughts about what this judge thinks about this evidence, whether or not it's very strong, and who could really be harmed here. This all hinges on whether or not the judge agrees which side is going to be harmed the most without an order like this. Cook is arguing the entire economy will be harmed without an order like this. And of course, Trump's lawyers will be pushing back hard on that in court.
Well, exactly to that point, Mike McKee, we think about the filing that we got this morning, the filing of that lawsuit. And as Erik mentioned, in the lawsuit, her lawyer is saying that this could cause irreparable harm. That's the term that they used to this U.S. economy. What exactly do they mean by that?
Well, essentially what they're saying is that the Fed would lose credibility and the markets would tank and the economy would go into free fall because the markets would no longer have any faith in the Federal Reserve. The irreparable harm line is something you see quite often in these filings, and I'm sure that the administration will say that if the president can't fire her, there would be irreparable harm. They did that in other cases where the president has fired people. But the one thing I think that's different in this case is that he doesn't have a direct interest in whether or not she is gone. This isn't a question, given what the Supreme Court said, this isn't a question of his right to fire her at will. He has to have cause. And so then the question becomes, is there cause? And as Erik was saying, we've seen the beginning of a defense of that from the Cook side.
Well, how difficult is it to prove on both sides of the equation, Mike?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to prove. In her case, this isn't going to be a trial. This is just going to be a temporary restraining order hearing, and the evidence that the judge will see is essentially what's being filed. And the argument that it is a clerical error or a possible clerical error is probably hard to disprove in a way. You would need to get somebody from one of the banks to come in and say, no, she knew what she was doing and we gave her a favor in return for this. For the administration, they've just basically made this broad assertion that in all of these cases, the president has the right, and it harms the president's ability to do his job if you take away his ability to fire people at will. So I imagine we'll get something along those lines as well, although they may argue, as the president did in his tweet, that having somebody who has a cloud over her head hurts credibility of the Fed.
Well, when we talk about, Fed credibility, we talk about potential irreparable harm. What sticks out to me is that the markets aren't pricing any of that in right now. Again, the S&P 500 at record highs. You take a look at the bond market, the 10-year Treasury yield, pretty well behaved right now. We're sitting out at about 421 right now on your benchmark 10-year. And Erik, I want to talk about timelines a little bit more here, because we mentioned that tomorrow, maybe tomorrow morning, we do get that TRO hearing. And the timeline here matters because we are counting down to the next Fed decision on the 17th.
Yeah, I'm not sure that a judge is necessarily going to want to take a deadline like that into account. I mean, sure, she'll take it into account, but it's not going to be all she bases it on, because these are cases that need to move along at sort of a deliberative pace. Trump has successfully gotten a lot of these cases to move quickly. But this is one, like you were saying, that it's not just about his right to fire people. It's about whether or not he has cause, and that is going to take a little bit longer, perhaps, to demonstrate in court. Are you going to have to look back at these old mortgage filings, or are they just going to focus on whether or not it even amounts to cause at all? She's saying that Trump jumped the gun here, that really she should have at least gotten a hearing internally, presented with the evidence, allowed to refute it before any of this even happened, and instead she was just fired through a tweet. So there's all kinds of different angles where the judge is going to want to look at this, and that could slow it down a little bit.
Erik, the word unprecedented has been used a lot.
Right. Yeah.
How does this fit into some of the other cases you've been covering, and especially everything coming out of the administration?
Well, it fits right in nicely. It has been like one unprecedented case sort of after another. And as you were saying, a lot of these cases are about the president's power. He's really been pushing it, the power of the executive in ways that I frankly don't think anyone anticipated a president would try to do. There has been just one little bit of, pushback from the Supreme Court and regarding for-cause firings at the Fed. So this really is kind of a new bar that Trump is having to meet as a result of that Supreme Court ruling, which carves out the Fed and gives it a little bit more of a higher bar for these firings. And so it really could go either way.
I have to say, I hear what you're saying, that, the judge probably isn't operating under the deadline of we have an FOMC decision coming up. But Mike, it feels like it's going to be the elephant in the room, especially when Jerome Powell takes the stage at the press conference. It feels like the past few months, all of the Fed meetings have been politicized, but now this one especially. Oh,
definitely. And the markets will be paying very close attention. I don't imagine anybody will be praying harder for a temporary restraining order than Jay Powell, because then he can get up and answer all our questions by saying it's an ongoing legal case. I can't comment on it. But in this case, the politics and the timing are tough because of the coming meeting. And Erik's right, the judge will take into consideration a whole bunch of things. But it almost doesn't matter in that sense, because the judge can grant the temporary restraining order, and about an hour later they're going to be before the appeals court asking for that to be overturned, and that takes time. So it's really hard to say whether she's going to be able to participate on the 17th or not. So we're just going to have to watch that. But I don't think it makes a big difference in terms of monetary policy. She's been voting with the chairman. She did express some concern about the fact that the labor report in July was not good, and so she's opened the door to voting with the chair if Jay Powell decides that they're going to cut rates. So it's probably, if you take her out of the mix, it isn't going to change the fact that the majority would be voting for a rate cut. And the real question is if they decided not to, and if the Senate puts Stephen Myron through to replace Adriana Kugler in time to participate, you might get that third dissent.
Yeah, Mike, Katie mentioned it, though. We are at all-time highs. We're not seeing a huge movement as it relates to treasuries, even the U.S. dollar. Is it a summer Thursday? Are all the juniors on the desk? Why are we not seeing a real reaction?
Well, I mean, it is a summer Thursday during the U.S. Open, we could point out. Maybe Tim should go around and ask people there why they aren't selling. No, I think it's my guess, and I don't know if Erik has the same sort of feeling, is that the markets are looking at this as in two ways. One, that there's a chance that Trump will lose this, that this isn't a slam dunk case. So why worry about it until we need to? There are all these legal steps in between, and Nvidia is going up. So we buy. And they're also looking at it as it doesn't really matter so much what happens with Lisa Cook. Now, the follow-on to that is there are people who are speculating that if Trump were to win this, for example, if she doesn't get the TRO, then it emboldens the president to try to fire Powell, because if he can come up with a pretext to fire Lisa Cook, he can come up with a pretext to fire Jay Powell. And by the time all of that played out, Powell would be leaving anyway, so he might be able to get rid of him early.
And just a reminder for those maybe listening at home, we're having a conversation with Bloomberg TV and radio, international economics and policy correspondent Mike McKee. This is radio on TV. I have to keep reminding myself. We're also speaking to Bloomberg News U.S. legal reporter Erik Larson. And Erik, weigh in on this non-reaction. Are there just too many questions about how this will go, given that, as Bailey mentioned, this is unprecedented?
Yeah, I was thinking about that as you were discussing it. And I think that we've seen so many of these disputes over firings and all these other Trump policies go so quickly, relatively quickly to the Supreme Court, that I think a lot of people who are trading on stuff like this are like, well, we know how this goes now. We're going to wait until the Supreme Court says something. That could have something to do with it. And certainly we have seen a lot of even these TROs, as we've been discussing, these temporary orders. Usually you can't appeal those. And Trump has successfully, appealed some of those too. So it is possible that it could get to the Supreme Court on a very preliminary ruling early on, even if the case continues to drag on for months or longer. But everyone could just be waiting for the Supreme Court to weigh in.
Well, I think people are noticing, too, that the decisions the court has made on these appeals have been whether somebody can stay in office while all of this is adjudicated. So even if, no matter which way the judges rule on whether she could remain in office, it's going to be a long time till we have a decision, and probably a long time before the court decides what cause is.
Yeah, Mike, you made an interesting point. If Trump feels emboldened to then go after Jay Powell, to me, the other question is, if he is not successful in ousting Cook, do we see the administration pivot toward another member of the Fed, or kind of what does that kind of path forward hypothetically look like?
Well, if they lose and they pivot immediately towards someone else from the board, that's not a good look before a judge, because then it becomes clear this is animosity towards the Fed, and you're trying, to find somebody to get. A number of people at the Fed are worried that they have been investigated without them knowing, and that this could happen to them as well. But I suspect one of the reasons that he went ahead with the Lisa Cook case is it doesn't really matter. If he loses, he hasn't lost a lot. If he lost the Powell case, that would be much worse. So in this case, it's sort of a trial balloon, and he can go after her. If he wins, then he has more power. If he loses, then he can move on to something else, and Powell will just serve out his term.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating, of course, to see how this plays out. We'll continue to follow it very closely on Bloomberg. But speaking of that September 17th rate decision that we're going to get, there's plenty to look at other than the politics of it, because we're going to get PCE tomorrow. And in the conversations I've been having on Bloomberg TV, many of the guests, the investors that we've been speaking to, when you think about the odds, 85% price chances of a rate cut next month. One of the things that could upset that apple cart, of course, will be delivered at 8:30 a.m. tomorrow.
It could, except that I always warn people, don't trade in Fed funds futures, because they change on a dime, and we might get a dime tomorrow.
Do they listen to you, those people?
They don't, for some reason. But the PCE numbers, they're composed of of data that are reported in other forums, other databases. And so once we get CPI, PPI, then the economists looking at this and the Fed folks looking at this have a pretty good idea of what PCE is going to be. And Jay Powell usually tells us what it's going to be in his news conference. And tomorrow we're expecting the headline number to go down by 1/10 of a point and the core not to be changed at all. So year over year, there's no change, which would leave you without a definitive number from PCE for the Fed to rely on. But we get that CPI report on September 11th, and of course the jobs report on September 5th. Those will probably matter more. What'll matter more tomorrow, if anything, is probably personal spending, because the Fed wants to know that people are not pulling back because they're worried about the economy right now. And the forecast is for a 0.5% gain. It was 0.3 in June. So it could be relatively good news for the president in that regard.
Well, I am looking forward to 8:30 a.m. tomorrow. Mike McKee will bring you those numbers with elegance and grace and context. Great roundtable to kick off today's show. That, of course, is Bloomberg international economics and policy correspondent Mike McKee and Bloomberg News U.S. legal reporter Erik Larson. Of course, it's all told a pretty quiet day in markets. We are at all-time highs, but when you're at these heights, Bailey, it doesn't take too much of a move to get us there.
No, not at all. And we also, Katie, we have volumes about 20% below what they normally are. One thing to call out, though, S&P, as you mentioned, higher by 0.25%, 300 stocks in the red. So a couple companies doing the heavy lifting. Nvidia is not one of them.
Yeah, no, Nvidia, one of those names in the red, currently off by about 0.7%. We're going to dig into the earnings report that it delivered after the bell yesterday and explain a little bit of this reaction, talk about some of the China concerns as well. That conversation coming up next. This is Bloomberg.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got the S&P 500 index trading at a record right on the cusp of 6,500, 64.98 where we stand right now. The Dow swinging between gains and losses. NASDAQ pushing higher. NASDAQ up 124 right now, up by about 0.6%. S&P up 0.3%. Dow, let's call that flat on the day. NASDAQ 100 index up 0.6%. The Bloomberg Mag 7 index up 0.5%. Nvidia, of course, a part of that index. Nvidia after earnings down now by 0.6%. We'll have a whole lot more on Nvidia coming up in just a moment with our Mandeep Singh. We've got the 10-year yielding 4.21%, the 2-year 3.63%. Spot gold up $21 the ounce, 34.18, gain there of 0.6%. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.6%, 64.54 a barrel. Bitcoin right now, little changed on the day at 112,451 on Bitcoin. Earnings news, lots of retailers this morning. Best Buy warning that tariffs continue to weigh on its business ahead of the holiday shopping season. Best Buy trading lower by 3.8%. Bath and Body Works profit missed expectations for the first time since 2020. Shares of Bath and Body Works down 9% right now. Also reporting this morning, Victoria's Secret. It raised its outlook after strong quarterly sales signal that the new CEO's turnaround plan is taking hold. Victoria's Secret up down by 3.6%. Again, recapping, S&P 500 index up 17, up 0.3%. Nvidia, the stock everybody's talking about, down 0.6%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you very much, Charlie. I'm Bailey Lipschultz alongside Katie Greifeld. We are filling in for Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec. Katie, as Charlie mentioned, Nvidia down 0.6% on a day when markets are trading higher. All clear?
It's interesting because we were down somewhat significantly pre-market overnight, 3% or so. We had been priced for about a 6% swing in either direction in the options market. So not quite matching those expectations, similar to the forecast that Nvidia gave.
Yeah, and this is a stock that was down almost 3%, traded as high as up 1.5%. All over the place, but right now we're going to break down everything that matters from that result with Bloomberg News U.S. semiconductors and networking reporter Ian King joining us from San Francisco, and Bloomberg Intelligence Global Head of Technology Research Mandeep Singh here in the studio. Mandeep, want to start with you. A lot of uncertainty, a lot of excitement going into the result. As Katie mentioned, 6% move priced in the options market, beat and raise, but data centers, China, what stood out to you from this print?
I mean, data centers clearly, and to my mind, you know, the China revenue is what created the noise in terms of the growth rates and whether they beat or miss. But there is no doubt that the demand for NVIDIA's systems and chips remains insatiable. And that is what is giving everyone the comfort that, you know, everyone is doubling down on AI chip capacity. The use cases are expanding. The ROI question is being answered. So from that perspective, there is not much negative. The only thing is, you know, they talked about hyperscalers making up $600 billion in CapEx for this year. I can't do the math. I just can't get to $600 billion. I mean, even if you add all the hyperscalers, that's like close to $400 billion. So I'm guessing he's talking about next year with a 50% growth. And even if you assume that 50% growth, I still find the numbers to be on the higher side. But maybe, you know, all the hyperscalers will come out and say they are raising their CapEx, and then those numbers may look good.
Well, Mandeep, we're talking about a $4.4 trillion company, up more than 30% this year alone. What could have the company delivered that actually would have led to a 6% move to the upside, or would it have taken Jensen Huang talking down kind of tremendously to see a real sell-off from where you sit?
I mean, just if the China revenues were part of the guide, the 2 to 5 billion in China revenue, they said in H20s that could be sold, the stock would have been up. So because the print was strong. So the question is, how sustainable is this growth rate? The 50%, they said hyperscale CapEx is going to keep growing 50%. Now, I think 2026, it may very well be true. I just don't know if they have visibility beyond 2026.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about big numbers. 600 billion is huge. Imagine a 50% growth on top of that 600 billion. We're talking about $1 trillion in CapEx from 4 hyperscalers. At least I can't fathom right now. Maybe I'm proven wrong, but it just feels too far-fetched.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the China question, because that, of course, was the big missing question mark in this report. Of course, what are the China revenues going to be? It's really hard to forecast. And Ian King, I know that you spoke to the CFO of Nvidia after this report. It was pretty spicy, I have to say. One of the quotes that she gave, Colette Kress, if nothing shows up, I've got licenses. I don't have to do this 15% until I see something that is a true regulatory document. Ian, of course, she's talking about that idea that the U.S. government is going to take a 15% cut of Chinese chip sales from Nvidia, from AMD. But it seems like she's saying it's not official until I see something in writing here.
I mean, she's doing a job, right? She's a CFO of a publicly traded company. When this kickback or tax, whatever you want to call it, was first announced by the president, there was a lot of reaction saying this might even be unconstitutional. How the heck is that going to work? What Colette is doing as the CFO of a publicly traded company is saying, look, there has to be rules in place. There has to be a mechanism by which this is legal under the US tax code, under SEC regulations. Once that happens, I'll pay, but right now that doesn't exist. So I wouldn't portray this as spicy or political or rebelling against what the president has said. I think what she had to say, and she had to say this, it was an illegal disclosure, is to her shareholders is like, hey, don't worry, I'm going to play by the rules here. And I think that was the point she was trying to make.
Well, Ian, the one thing that I feel like is top of mind for investors is trying to stay in favor of the White House. Obviously, you cover the likes of Intel. When you look at kind of whether it's spicy or not, potential pushback or wanting clarity, is there a risk for Nvidia trying to get on, potentially getting on the wrong side of the Trump administration?
I mean, it's not just the Trump administration. They said it pretty explicitly. They're like, we don't know what's going to happen, right? We've seen them have some traction with the Trump administration, but then, as we reported, there's opposition, and that sparks opposition in Beijing. So what they said was like, there's so much going on in geopolitics, so much going on in China, so much going on in Washington. This is really difficult to get right. And to be fair to them, we're one social media post away from everything changing completely. So they said, I had the conversation with Colette. I was like, well, come on, tell us, how much of this money do you think you're going to get? She said, oh, well, we think we're going to get some. We just don't know how much, and we just don't know when that might come. So, the safe and fair thing to do is like to say nothing and then hope for the best kind of thing. So when you think about it, that's a pretty complicated and difficult situation to be in as a publicly traded company.
Yeah, absolutely. You think about the difficulties there, and it's a hard job to have. But Mandeep, one of the other things that's hanging over this stock, not that you'd necessarily see it in the performance, but one of the big question marks, if you want to call it that, is the return on investment. You think about the concentrated customer base of Nvidia. As you mentioned, it's really just a handful of mega cap tech companies pouring billions of dollars towards Nvidia. I guess part of the existential fear out there is that they're going to maybe slow down, that maybe they're overbuilding right now.
Well, so what they said on the call was they are sold out for all of their SKUs, whether it's Hopper, Blackwell Ultra. So that what just goes to show that, the demand side is still in a situation where you just can't meet the demand. And look, in the case of Microsoft, I mean, you could attribute almost 20 percentage point of growth in Azure to AI. So when you have an $80 billion business where 20 percentage points of growth is AI, that's ROI. And we saw Snowflake and MongoDB all call out AI agents as a driver of, upside to their quarter. So I wouldn't question the ROI. To me, the numbers just keep getting bigger and bigger to a point where I just feel you've got power constraints. So even if, let's say, hyperscalers raise their capex to $150 billion, Microsoft does $150 billion in capex, where do you find the power to deploy all the chips you're getting from Nvidia? So you will hit a wall ultimately because there's only so much data center infrastructure you can create. Even if Nvidia is willing to supply more chips, you have other constraints like power, and you can't deploy those chips. So there is a certain cap, at least in my mind, to how high these capex estimates can go and how much these companies can buy, because you just can't deploy them.
We are joined by Bloomberg Intelligence Global Head of Technology Research, Mandeep Singh, as well as Bloomberg News U.S. Semiconductors and Networking reporter Ian King from San Francisco. Talking Nvidia, the stock down 0.5% again on a day when the major U.S. Indexes are trading higher. Ian, all this talk around AI, it seems kind of an insatiable demand from investors, from consumers, from these hyperscalers. What's the read in San Francisco on demand for AI and where we're going and how these results and kind of this conversation around Nvidia is driving the technology in the entire space forward?
Again, I mean, I can only report on what is being said and the numbers, and it's, you know, Jensen Huang made a big part of his pitch to reassure people yesterday. Look how many companies are being started up. Look how much funding is pouring into it. And then he segued that into, and the technology is changing as well, that we're much better at doing these things, that AI has kind of grown up and is now a viable tool in the economy. And for the concerns that Mandeep has and is expressing, and that are shared by many others, to be put to bed, what Jensen is saying has to come true, that AI has to become a pervasive part of the economy. And that's a much broader question. Nvidia is certainly trying its best, throwing money at everything, every industry that might use AI to try to make it happen more quickly. But I think, you know, if we're honest, it hasn't happened yet. It's still the preserve of a lot of big companies. It's still helping coding. It's still helping customer services. But has it really changed transportation? Has it really changed the energy industry? And the answer is probably not yet.
Not yet. Ian King, of course, covers all of this for Bloomberg News, joining us from San Francisco. Mandeep, before we let you go, joining us in studio in 30 seconds, I mean, it wasn't all about Nvidia yesterday. We did get some other reports, including CrowdStrike. What is the high-level takeaway there?
I mean, this is a company that is trying to bundle as much security they can. Palo Alto made this big acquisition of CyberArk that hasn't closed. So consolidation is going on in security, and everyone is trying to pivot to AI agents. So I'm not questioning the ROI on AI spend. It's there. AI agents are getting deployed. Everyone is adjusting their product portfolio. It's just the pace of growth. And that's where I still have my question mark.
All right. A mic drop from Mandeep Singh, of course, of Bloomberg Intelligence. He heads up our global technology research there. Bailey Lipschultz, an interesting day. Again, I'm just struck at the breadth of this market. Seems strong. Katie,
the thing that's interesting, too, with CrowdStrike, we call it a mixed report. The stock's up more than 4%. I know it's pulled back, but we're still seeing buyers emerging for anything that's perceived to be on sale.
Absolutely. All right. We are just getting started here on Bloomberg Businessweek. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. This is Bloomberg.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. A day after Nvidia and ahead of key inflation data, we've got the S&P trading at a record. Right now, 6502, up 21 points, higher by 0.3%. Keep it locked into Bloomberg Television and Radio to see if we close above or below that 6,500 round number. Right now, we have got the Dow up 49, gain there of 0.1%. NASDAQ up 0.6%. The NASDAQ 100 index also up 0.6%. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares is advancing now by 0.1%. And the Mag 7 index up by 0.5%. A notable exception, though, in that index, Nvidia. It is down now by 0.5%. The 10-year at 4.21% with a 2-year currently yielding 3.63%. Gold up 0.6%, 34.18 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.6%, 68.54. 64.55, I should say, on the WTI. Brent 68.54. Bitcoin right now up 0.3%, 112,700 on Bitcoin. Lots of retailers reported this morning, including Dollar General. It reported stronger than expected sales, also raised its forecast. Shares up now by 0.4%. Dick's Sporting Goods raised its full-year outlook, a welcome sign of strong consumer demand as the retailer prepares to acquire sneaker chain Foot Locker. Shares of Dick's Sporting Goods, they're down 5%. Foot Locker down by 5.4%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, thank you for that update, Charlie Pellet. Let's turn back now to the world of Washington. We're not talking about the Fed. This time we're talking about the CDC. This breaking news yesterday that the Trump administration has ousted the director of the CDC just weeks into her tenure. As our reporting shows, this follows a dispute with Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Let's turn now to Bloomberg Health reporter Madison Muller joining us on Zoom from Chicago. She was part of the team that broke this news yesterday. Madison, talk to us about how exactly this transpired, what that clash was about.
Yeah, so we're still learning the details of this, Katie. I mean, it is a pretty stunning situation. Monarez has only been at the CDC for a number of weeks. She was confirmed at the end of July. And in that time and over the last few months, there's obviously been a lot of turmoil and a lot of controversy and different opinions about the vaccination schedule and vaccines and some of RFK Jr.'s stances on vaccines. And so what we're learning and what we know so far is that there was some type of confrontation earlier this week, and that the tensions sort of have boiled over at this point over the clash between different opinions on vaccines and the vaccination schedule. And we've also seen several other senior leaders at the CDC, people who are career veterans at the CDC, have decades of public health experience leaving this week as well. So there's sort of this mass exodus happening at the agency right now.
Yeah, Madison, it feels a bit like a revolving door to an extent across kind of the entire empire or agency that RFK Jr. oversees. What's the feeling when you talk to people in the industry, whether it's CEOs of drug developers or investors, on what this does mean for the entire kind of healthcare space in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely leaves the door open for RFK to sort of reshape public health in the United States in the image that he wants, and more aligned, and to make it more aligned with his views and the Make America Healthy Again movement. And so there are some definite concerns, especially from the drug industry in the wake of this news, especially around some of the other senior leaders that have left the CDC. As we reported in our story, some people within the industry said that Dimitri Daskalakis and some of these other leaders were kind of like the last voice of reason, and were people that they were hoping would sort of hold the values of the old CDC in place, with RFK sort of changing so much. And so there's definitely some concerns right now that the public health infrastructure in this country is going to change pretty tremendously, but we'll have to wait to see what happens because, as we've seen the last few months with many different changes within the Trump administration, some of them hold, some of them don't. And so the situation right now is quite fluid, but we are watching and waiting to see what happens next.
Yeah, certainly a fluid situation. And we did see reaction come in after you broke this news. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, for example, he is the ranking member of the Senate Health Committee. He called for a hearing with Kennedy about the firing. So talk to us about what the next steps here might look like.
Yeah, we know that RFK is going to be testifying at a hearing next week. And so we'll see if this comes up. But again, next steps are going to have to be fluid. We also saw Bill Cassidy asking for some type of oversight hearing and asking for the postponing of this ACIP meeting, which is supposed to happen in September. ACIP is a group of vaccine advisors who help write and make the recommendations for the immunization schedule in the United States. And that group, which was sort of once not something that a lot of people in the United States knew what they actually did, has become really a flashpoint for a lot of the controversies and arguments happening within HHS right now. And so that group is supposed to meet September 18th to the 19th to discuss the immunization schedule. And we see Senator Bill Cassidy now asking for maybe that to be postponed. So there's some pieces that could happen, lots of moving pieces right now, and we'll just have to, again, wait and see what happens next.
And Madison, Bloomberg opinion columnist Lisa Jarvis posited the question, what does the world without a fully functional CDC look like? And as we've seen RFK Jr. shaking up the CDC and other agencies, what does that look like? Is it just for the viewers and listeners to understand what the CDC oversees entirely, not just kind of vaccine uncertainty, but also food and other things?
Yeah, so the CDC is really the front line against any public health threat. And public health threats are everything from obesity to pandemics to, they're the ones that are responsible for collecting all of the health data really in our country. And so without all of these people there and sort of the breakdown of this public health agency could have ripple effects on lots of different things. I mean, the leaders that have left so far were Dimitri Daskalakis, who was overseeing the CDC's respiratory influenza branch. We have the chief medical officer leaving. There are people that are sort of have a wide range of responsibilities. And this also comes on the heels of mass layoffs at the CDC. So the agency was already being gutted. Morale is extremely low right now there from both the layoffs and from a shooting that took place, on campus a couple of weeks ago. And so there's a lot happening at the agency right now that makes it quite hard for people there to do their jobs. And the breakdown of that could have consequences that I'm not sure if we're ready for, prepared for, or even quite know the extent of yet.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, you think about morale. You also think about what that means for recruitment in terms of replacing some of these lost employees. And to that point, Madison, do we have any idea who could replace Susan Monarez, or is it too preliminary at this moment?
We are trying to figure that out right now. I mean, there definitely are some names out there, and I'm sure that there is definitely an idea of who is going to be replacing her, but we are not completely sure yet who that will be. So that's another story that's sort of developing right now. And we'll have to wait to see what happens. But again, this is a CDC director is a Senate confirmed position. So Susan Monarez had to go through a Senate confirmation process to even get in there. And they could name an acting director, but to have another CDC director named, they will have to go through a Senate confirmation process again.
All right, Madison, really appreciate your reporting. That is Bloomberg News health reporter Madison Muller reporting on the story that the Trump administration has ousted the director of the CDC just weeks into her tenure. Meanwhile, let's switch gears here. You might have noticed that I'm Katie Greifeld. That's Bailey Lipschultz. We're not Carol Massar. We're not Tim Stenovic. We're not Molly Smith. And that's actually who we're going to go to right now. Carol Massar is enjoying a well-deserved vacation. But Tim and Molly, they are back at the U.S. Open in Queens, New York for America's most prestigious tennis tournament. They're on the ground now in the shadow of Arthur Ashe Stadium. They join us now for a preview of what's ahead for the Bloomberg radio audience this afternoon. Tim, Molly, why exactly are you out there? I always ask this question every single year.
Why not? Wouldn't you be out here if you could be out here too, Katie? This is one of the best days that we can broadcast for Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. It's always a couple of days that I look forward to as part of the year of programming. And you're right, we are here in the shadow of Arthur Ashe Stadium in Flushing, New York for the U.S. Open. And it's a windy yet otherwise really glorious day here. Certainly we're battling the wind, but not as much as the players out there, Molly, are battling it. This is the type of condition that you got to be ready for when you're playing in front of the world.
Yeah, this is what I think most tennis players would tell you they struggle with the most, far more than the sun. They're used to the sun, but wind is a whole other game. It is swirling out here. We had parts of the set get knocked over to us that have now since been taken down.
You can hear the wind as well.
You can hear it. Maybe you can see this umbrella fluttering above us and around us. It's going to be a windy day, but we're here for it. There's been a lot of great tennis so far. We're going to keep you updated on the next 2 hours, and hopefully you can stick around for more this evening.
Yeah, we got a great program coming up over the next 2 hours on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. We're going to be speaking with Luke Jensen in just a few minutes. You might remember him as a former professional tennis player. He's a Grand Slam doubles champion. He's going to be stopping by the set here, too. Then we got John Wertheim stopping by. You know him from the Tennis Channel. You know him from 60 Minutes. You know him from, 10 books that he's written. So we got some great programming coming up over the next couple of hours right here on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily.
Yeah,
wish you guys were here, though. We do wish you were here.
Wish I was, too. That is Tim Stenovic and Molly Smith hanging out in Flushing, New York at the U.S. Open. Katie, I'm jealous, though. I will say, one's wearing a denim jacket, the other one's wearing a short sleeve button down, kind of a mixed message.
I don't really get it. I also love them complaining about the wind, battling the wind. Truly our toughest soldiers out there at Arthur Ashe Stadium. But they do have a great lineup coming up this afternoon on Bloomberg Radio. So looking forward to listening.
Yeah, likewise as well. Katie, Let's take a look at some stocks on the move today. I'm Bailey Lipschultz with Katie Greifeld, and we're joined by Bloomberg News Deputy Team Leader for U.S. Equities, Jess Menton. Jess, a lot going on. What's top of the lineup for you?
Well, looking at the MOV function for the S&P 500, so top the leaderboard today, it's actually Datadog. So the ticker is DDOG. So, of course, one of Tom Keem's favorites, I'm sure. So this is a software provider, and it's actually rising on the back of a number of other companies that had reported results today, if you're looking at Snowflake, as well as MongoDB. But specifically with Datadog, if you look at this stock, up over 7% right now, on pace for its best day since July 3rd. And also looking at basically just on where it's been so far this year, basically gone nowhere, still down about 2%. So currently sits about 25% below its 52-week high, actually, and still holding near that 200-day moving average. So just to point out in perspective, Datadog joined the S&P 500 actually in early July. So hasn't been in the major index that long. So the stock's up actually down roughly 4% since it did replace Juniper Networks. But if you look over at some of its peers too, Snowflake up over 20% right now, on pace for its best day since November 2024, and Snow is the ticker symbol on that. And if you look at MongoDB, MDB is the ticker, up 8% right now, on pace for its best day since actually yesterday.
Oh, there you go. And you particularly like the logo of this company.
I love the logo. If you haven't seen it, it's a puppy holding an image.
It really is, yeah.
When they went public, I remember I was like, am I allowed to get a t-shirt of this company logo? Because it's my favorite. But Jess, less fun, less software-y.
Unfortunate.
Hormel Foods?
Hey, that's super fun.
Okay.
Maker of Spam,
yeah,
right?
Let's go.
And other deli meats, HRL is the ticker symbol, down more than 12%. So I had to double check this, but this looks like potentially, if this holds through the close, it would be its biggest one-day percentage drop on record if you look at data going back through Bloomberg since 1980 there. So tough year for Hormel, shed about 20% of its value so far in 2025. The reason for today, though, cost pressures are stinging some of those profits. So it posted a third quarter profit that missed estimates, and it cut its yearly guidance here. And then during the earnings call, the company talked about taking on targeted pricing actions there. And they're also expecting that the profit recovery to still lag here next year as well. So if you look over at Jen Bartashis at Bloomberg Intelligence, so one of our top strategists that covers this corner of the market, she was talking about how margin and profits will likely still remain pressured in the fourth quarter on elevated pork and beef prices here. So if you look at the ANR function, 3 buys, 8 holds, 1 sell.
All right, man, hate to see those elevated pork and beef prices there. Let's talk about something totally different, and that is Bath and Body Works. I know you're keeping an eye on that company. I have to say, I always get them confused with Bed Bath & Beyond.
I know, I was going to say, because usually that's one of course, Bailey's favorites when it comes to Bed Bath & Beyond. But this is Bath and Body Works, so BBWI is the ticker symbol on this. So down almost 8%, so on pace for its worst day since April 10th earlier this year. So, of course, specialty retailer, body care products. It actually cut its outlook, so it lowered the top end of its sales growth range forecast for the full year. It also said it expects tariffs to hurt gross profits by roughly $85 million. And then this is a company, it's not in the S&P 500, it's in the Russell 1000 index. It's also actually in the S&P 400 mid-cap index. Its market cap is around $6 billion. So if you're looking at basically where it is so far this year, it's lost about a quarter of its value so far, guys.
Yeah, Jess, all I'm going to say is come Christmas time or holiday season, the hand soap on sale at Bath & Body Works.
That's right. You can't miss that. Or the sanitizer.
Awesome. Our thanks to Jess Menton, again, Bloomberg News Deputy Team Leader for U.S. Equities. For more conversations like this, listen to our Stock Movers podcast. Subscribe for 5-minute episodes on the biggest winners and losers in the stock market. Listen to Stock Movers on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Katie, again, Nvidia down, markets up.
Yeah.
What are you watching? What's going on? What stands out to you?
I mean, again, I think on a normal day, meaning a day that isn't late August, you could point at that and say, wow, there's some health to this market. The fact that we are able to reach these all-time highs, despite having the biggest company in the world down on the day. But then you take a look at what volume looks like, and it's pretty amazing. On the S&P 500, trading volume is about 16% below its 30-day average. So in a market as thin as this one, Bailey, it's hard to take these moves all that seriously.
And I use the function FTW, factors to watch, all the time. It helps break down what's outperforming, what's underperforming. Top performers, momentum, growth, stocks who have had EPS revisions to the upside, all outperforming. You know what's down, Katie? Low volatility, dividend payers, value stocks. I don't know if it's short covering, but it certainly seems like a slow August Thursday where people were either putting on a bit of risk ahead of economic data tomorrow or covering some of those short positions.
Yeah, it's funny. It's felt like a real wait and see week in general. I mean, for beginners, at the start of the week, we were waiting for Nvidia earnings, and they were consequential, maybe not to the degree that traders had been expecting. Now we're waiting and seeing for PCE tomorrow, a check on inflation with the Fed's dual mandate in conflict here. But really, I think we're just waiting for the calendar to flip and people to come back from the Hamptons. And maybe then we'll get some more serious trades. I do want to point out, though, that tech broadly, despite Nvidia, is higher right now. You take a look at the biggest gainers in the S&P 500. Right up at the top, you have Broadcom, Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Microsoft, which is interesting to me, Bailey, because with this setup, you could have said coming into today, not knowing anything else, that, okay, if Nvidia disappoints, it's probably going to be bad news for the rest of the Mag 7 complex since they all just spend money on each other. But that doesn't seem to be the trade today.
No, not the case. And as you mentioned, we have the S&P up, call it 20 points. As you mentioned, that outperformance. NASDAQ 100 up 140 points, again, on a day where Nvidia is lower. Things that are also top of mind, we talked about at the top of the show, everything kind of going on with Fed Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, kind of the back and forth, the lawsuit, keeping an eye on the headlines that will be coming tomorrow morning from that hearing. And really kind of, Katie, as you mentioned again, a lot of investors, a lot of bankers at the Hamptons, maybe at the U.S. Open, hanging out with Tim and Molly, or even escaping, call it, to the south of France.
I think that everyone has their eyes trained on what's going on Bloomberg TV right now. I will say I am looking forward to tomorrow's PCE figures. You take a look at some of the expectations here on core PCE, which I think that most people will be watching. The monthly figure expected in July to rise by 0.3%. Core PCE on an annualized basis expected to come in at about 2.9%. That would be a bump up from the prior read. And I mean, you think about where the Fed is right now, whether they're more concerned about inflation, whether they're more concerned about the labor market. We have 7 days in between PCE and, of course, that jobs report next Friday.
And then also, as you mentioned, economic data, GDP coming in strong. So we're not really seeing a slowing of the economy. I'll also be keeping an eye on that UMich sentiment later in the morning, tomorrow morning, as we kind of wade through the economic data on what probably is a very slow Friday.
Well, we're going to follow it all across the Bloomberg platforms. If you're watching us on YouTube or listening to us on radio, Bloomberg Businessweek Daily continues live from the U.S. Open with Tim and Molly. If you're watching us on Bloomberg Television, the close is up next.